Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are in the Demonstrating Implementation Excellence stream here at the SNOMED CT 2023 Expo. My name is Susie Roy. I'm the Customer Relations Manager for the Americas, Collaboration Specialist, and Research Engagement Lead at SNOMED International, and I'll be moderating today's session. For those who are online, please go ahead and enter your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And those who are in the room, at the end of today's presentation, we'll ask that you can go up to the microphone in the center of the room to ask your questions there. Please do use the mic, as those online will need to hear your questions as well. So I'm pleased to introduce Brian Carlsen from West Coast Informatics, who will be presenting Beyond the Browser Terminology as a Wiki. Not Brian.
And I am not Brian.
My problem children here.
Yeah, Brian asked me to crash this party, so I'm gonna do the first part, and then Brian's gonna come up and do the demo. Although we're not gonna be able to do a live demo, you'll be able to follow along on your phone if you wanna do that. So terminology as a wiki, there's definitely a need to support a wider audience. We have a lot of clinical reference groups in SNOMED. A lot of clinicians who don't necessarily know how to use a terminology editing environment or are not as comfortable with the browser. So at WCI, we like to make terminology as easy as possible. So we investigated how to support that wider audience using something that users are a little more familiar with. I've been supporting terminologists for 20 years, and their go-to is a spreadsheet. So something a little more robust than a spreadsheet would be something like a wiki. Most people these days are familiar with wikis, at least from like a Wikipedia standpoint. People are pretty familiar with that and how to use one. But a lot of us use things like Confluence in our day-to-day work as well. So having something that people are more familiar with, easier to use, and could support some collaboration as they're using the data. There we go. So some of the technical advantages of a wiki, you don't really have to build a widget to display the terminology. You just need to be able to get the terminology in there in some way that's user friendly. You have standard authentication mechanisms. So if you already have a Confluence set up, you can use the standard authentication stuff that you have for your organization. You don't have to build anything additional into it. It allows you to scale, so you can scale the amount of users that are using the wiki. So a lot of benefits that you don't have to technically develop yourself. So it's less time building that software components and more time focusing on how you can present that information in a way that is best for the users. There we go. So from a SNOMED perspective, you have a lot of rich data, and you can use stuff from the UMLS as well to help display the terminologies to users. So you can pull obviously in the concept information, the codes and descriptions, and then display that in a way that's more user-friendly. You can pull in translated content. So if you want to do a cross-border sharing of the information, you can do that. You can directly add in the parents and children and allow browsing of that. You can pull in OWL axioms, reference set memberships, cross mappings to other terminologies. There's a lot of information that you can then display fairly easily. And then something that we've done for this project is we enrich that data. So if you're familiar with the SNOMED browser, you know there's concept diagrams within there. If you navigate to the right spot, you can find those concept diagrams. So we generated those concept diagrams. We have an API that allows us to generate concept diagrams for every concept, and we have that information displayed. We also did a little bit of work this summer with GPT-4 and created some text definitions as a separate project, which at some point probably we'll do a paper on or a presentation maybe next year. So we've added some text definitions that GPT-4 generated. We did some human review of that and have some interesting findings. But there's a lot of other things that you can add and enrich that data and support whatever use case you have. So some of the other things that you can use this for is obviously not just displaying the data, but you could use it to distribute it. So if you want to distribute information, or the content for the terminologies. In this case, we chose IPS, but we could easily load the SNOMED LOINC ontology in there, or LOINC SNOMED ontology. You could use it as a content request system or a submission. So we've added a few buttons in there that don't really, they add the information to the end of the page, but they don't really connect to anything yet. But you could suggest synonyms, suggest new children for a concept, or new parents even. And you could use this to develop a community addition to SNOMED. So this could really kind of be a way for clinicians to suggest additions to concepts in SNOMED. Choosing a solution, there's lots of different wiki software that you could use to do this. So we looked at a few different ones, but settled on Atlassian's because that's something we use internally and something that SNOMED uses and most people are familiar with. But really, you could do that in any way. We also wanted to use something that was viewable from your phone. So this is the mobile. These are mobile screenshots from the term wiki. It's obviously, it actually looks pretty good from a mobile browsing perspective. You can see the diagram there. It's obviously a little small on an iPhone, I think Brian uses Android, but I think it's the same on an iPhone. But yeah, the mobile browsing is not too bad. Brian?
Yeah. So we wanted to do a demo, and I was told we'd be able to do a demo, but then today I was told we would not be able to do a demo. But fortunately, we put in some slides so we can kind of walk through what aspects are of a thing, and we'll give people a chance to have a look at it. But I wanted to just do a very quick review of how we did this. So we started with SNOMED data. What we're doing here is loading cross terminologies too. So there's a SNOMED IPS content, because there's a nice lead in from Rob that it's free. And so we can publish it, which we couldn't do with the whole international edition. And that way we can make it public. So this whole site is available, anybody can go in there. And we put ICD-10-CM in there and loaded the maps essentially between the portion of SNOMED that is IPS and the corresponding ICD-10-CM things that they go to. So we have a little module that takes all of this data, builds some intermediate formats, calls the diagramming service to generate a diagram, and then calls the API for Atlassian to load all of the content. And, you know, kind of Tim went through the slides. The real idea here is you could put anything in here, right? Wikis support multimedia content, videos, links to any other related data sources. We could put quality information or statistical information or cost information or anything else that's kind of relevant for whatever the use case is. And then the idea is you have a template that for each page, you just plug in the information from whatever the data sources are. And then we have a backend service to this, which will look at a couple buttons just to show that you could add interactivity beyond simple comments and starring pages and things like that, which wikis support, so that you could do sort of minor structured editing with forms to allow a community context to contribute without impacting directly an authoring environment, which you could then pull out into, say, a content request submission system, which could then feed an authoring environment. So, and then you could republish back the whole thing. So you could do a whole closed loop end-to-end content maintenance thing with this architecture. Can't do a demo. Oh, the QR code didn't make it into this version of the slides. So I'll just say you can go to westcoastinformatics.com/termwiki and you can have a look at it. We tried to get a version that had a big QR code in here, but I guess our update to the slide deck didn't make that. But you can also come by our booth and we'll help you get connected to it so you can play around with it. But basically there's a top level page here that's sort of, this was built for the SNOMED Expo. We've got SNOMED IPS content, the corresponding ICD-10-CM content. I showed LOINC and ArcStorm here, but if you go to these pages, it just says this is something we could do to give the idea that this is also supportive of a larger context of content, not just a single terminology. There's a ref set catalog page. So we'll go through a few of these things. There's a top level page when you come to SNOMED. This is an ultra mini data set that these slides were taken from. The full thing is actually loaded on the live website. So these are going to be sort of scanter views of the data than what's actually there now. But, you know, list the kind of top level things in SNOMED so you can see them easily. The ref sets that we loaded data for and the map sets that are here. So just kind of like a summary of what SNOMED content is available. Here's an example of a page, viscous structure finding. Not the most interesting concept, but it was one of the ones in the set that we had. And you can see here next to descriptions and child concepts at the bottom, there's little buttons. So the idea of suggest a synonym is that it takes you to well, okay, here's the lower part of this page with the diagram. All right, we'll get to the form in a second. ICD-10 pages are a little bit simpler because there's less information, but they are here. And we tried to sort of use the same basic template to show an amount of information. This is the form when you click the suggest a synonym button. So it takes you off Atlassian to our back end. These are the fields that are in the content request submission system that SNOMED offers. We actually even made the topics a little pick list, just like they are in the tool. And the idea is that you can fill this out and click the submit button, and it takes you back to the page that you were on, but it adds a little payload at the bottom. This is what it does right now. So this is a kind of technical representation of the request that you made. Now, one could use the same APIs to kind of scrape these little blocks and feed them into the actual request system so that, you know, the user isn't using a tool other than a wiki, but we're collecting all the relevant information to be able to drive like a full authoring process behind the scenes. The only things we put in there right now are suggest a synonym and suggest a child concept. By no means are those the only things you could do. You could have a full modeling thing. You could have AI generated content that people could approve. You know, my goal in this is to just sort of get people thinking about how to interact with terminology in a completely different way. There's so many different things that we could do that don't require building a bunch of tools. And as Tim said, building a bunch of widgets. We can just put the content there. And additionally, we can put functional buttons that take you somewhere else to do the more complicated things that are not naturally supported in the wiki environment. Wikis have other user engagement features just naturally built in. This is my favorite SNOMED concept. Or you can just arbitrarily highlight a block of text here and make a comment. This actually works whether you're logged in or not. So you can receive anonymous comments from a user community, beyond, like if you make this public like we did. And you can pull all of that stuff out too. So you can have, you know, what are the concepts people are looking at? What are the concepts people are commenting on? You get some sort of additional feedback about where people are interested in developing the content or paying attention to it or doing other things with it. We also threw in some pages just to say ref sets and map sets are important. So these are just some things that we had pulled from NLM. So the concepts that happen to overlap with the IPS are listed here. And then there's a kind of page that is really just a simple list of the concepts that are involved. And then they, of course, everywhere where there's a concept ID or a code, it links to the corresponding page. It's a great thing about wikis. Same thing with mappings. And then this one was a little awkward because the map content is gigantic, tens of thousands of entries. In this version, the ICD-10 code on the right here, you can see is linked, but the name is not there. In the current version of this, the name is there. And I think we did a little chunking because Atlassian won't let you load 20 megabytes of mapping entries, nor do you want users to have to do that. So there's some interesting kind of things about how to present the data. And that looks like about where we're at. I was hoping to put the QR code up here so that people could scan it. But I guess we didn't get that. So I think we'll just stop there and say, do people have any questions? Are there other things that you think would be interesting? Oh yeah, the link is here at the bottom though. So if you wanted to get out your phone and type all that in, you're welcome to do so. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Brian. Yes.
Do we have time for questions?
Yeah,
or
we
are
have
done?
plenty of time. We have plenty of time. So those who are online, please go ahead and enter your question into the Q&A box. Anyone here in the room, please go ahead and go up to the microphone and you can ask your question. So Brian, I guess I'll kind of start off. Do you see this as a way to kind of build like some sort of integration or a possible way to build an integration between this and with our SNOMED content request system?
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of an idea. I have this sort of thought in the back of my head. We've been talking about what a community edition of SNOMED would be with all the different extensions that people want to share and publish. And how do you do that? You know, because you can't classify it all together and all this complicated stuff. So, you know, one idea was to say, you could just put it all in a place where everyone in the community can participate and look at it. SNOMED actually uses Confluence very heavily and everybody's got a user account. So you could put it behind a wall and not make it public if that was a concern. And then ultimately, exactly, I mean, you can connect this in various ways to the tooling that's used to support and drive content development. I would love to see in the long term, there is no content request tool. You just do something very simple and that's it. And you could support batch submission and the other things that aren't like shown here. You could go to a page where you upload your spreadsheet or whatever. So there is some tooling in the back, but it's lightweight and simple. Don't worry about it.
Any other questions? I have one. So, Brian, you said on there that you did a mapping between the IPS to ICD-10-CM.
We didn't do the mapping. We took the published map from NLM
Okay.
and we kept only the entries for the IPS concepts and
That's
then
still
only the
interesting.
entries from the other side.
So you
Yeah.
had essentially like a subset
It's a
of those.
subset, yeah.
Can you imagine a use case of that? Because the ICD-10-CM, of course, is US based, and of course, US can
Yes.
utilize all of SNOMED CT. So I'm just wondering, what was the use case in
Well,
deriving
it was
that
more just
subset?
to show the capability. I thought
Okay.
about putting ICD-10 in there, but it's license restricted in a way that would make it uncomfortable for me to publish it at scale. And so ICD-10-CM was a sort of easier option because
Got it.
anybody can just go download it from CDC.
Hey, Brian, thanks. So this sounds a lot to me like crowdsourcing terminology.
Yeah.
Given the fact that we have some fairly stringent editorial policies, how do we avoid this becoming the Wild West?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, but there's two answers to it. One is you don't have to do anything with the things that people suggest. So you could take the data out that's part of the suggestion process and run it through a thing to qualify whether it was sufficiently robust or aligned with editorial policy to move it forward, right? I mean, just like you don't take every submission in the request submission system and implement it, you reject some of them. So that's one way of doing it. And then also, when you click those suggest buttons, there is some technology behind that that responds to that. And you could sort of control things a little bit more that require certain information, the references, the use cases, and whatever else you needed. And also there's user management in the wiki. So you could say only certain users were allowed to do this kind of thing if you wanted to do that.
So in that type of request thing, one of the things that we mandate in terms of requests is that there be an authoritative source and a use case associated with it.
Yeah.
I think it would be really good if we added something that there has to be some justification for saying it other than you haven't got my words.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a suggestion that put a little bit more rigor.
Yeah.
That even though it's crowdsourced, it still requires some rigor.
Absolutely. And again, this was just put together to show what we can do. I think in a real deployment of something like this as a product, it would do something more rigorous like that. Kinwa, I think you might have had a question.
So Brian, my question is related to ICD-10-CM. So right now, I mean, on the SNOMED browser, then you cannot search by 10-CM code, right? But on this one, I think you have the flexibility of being able to start
Yes.
from the ICD-10-CM side and find your related SNOMED.
Exactly,
Is that
yeah.
something-
So I don't have a screen. I should have put a screenshot in there, but the wiki has a search. And if you just go in there and type kidney, you'll see a mixture of pages. So we put the codes and the names on the page names. So when you do the search results are actually meaningful, but you can tell whether they're SNOMED or ICD-10 things. And then you're right, you could sort of take whichever perspective and reverse engineer it, yeah, to follow the chains. That's the whole point, right? It's an interconnected graph represented as a series of static pages.
Yes, I think that's a useful feature. Really.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Any more questions for Brian? None online. I
We
guess-
would have taken more time if I could have done a demo.
What are you planning? What's the next big project that you're going to do with this?
Well, so that's a good question too. It says powered by TermHub all over this thing. So, we're developing our next generation, well, we're actually launching it at the conference here. But one of the things that I want to be able to do is in the tool, you can create projects that are combinations of content, terminologies, and map sets that you want. And we're eventually going to just have a button. So you essentially you create the set of content and functional features you're interested in, and then you can just build it and it'll automatically deploy it to an environment. So you can easily stand this up with subsets of things or targeted for specific communities and whatever you want. I mean, obviously there's some integration questions, who are the users and, stuff like that. But, trying to make this into something real, like push this forward. And I'd love for even the IPS community itself to adopt something that was like this perspective so the user community could interact with the content this way in addition to the IPS browser and whatever. Yeah.
Okay, and with that, I'd like everyone to please give a round of applause to Brian Carlsen and West Coast Informatics. So for those who are in the room, I believe lunch starts around 12:30, I think. And for those online, I'm sorry you don't get to join us for lunch, but I do hope that you join us this afternoon for more sessions. Thank you so much.